where the red fern grows. At the end of chapter 3, our 12-year-old protagonist was able to raise $50 as he took it to the store to his grandfather, who wanted him to raise the $50 to buy the two puppies. And now, chapter 4. Day after day, I flew to the store. Grandpa would shake his head. Then, on Monday, as I entered the store, I sensed a change in him. He was in high spirits, talking and laughing with half a dozen farmers. Every time I caught his eye, he would smile and wink at me. I thought the farmers would never leave, but finally the store was empty. Grandpa told me the letter had come. The kennels were still there, and they had dogs for sale. And another thing, the dog market had gone downhill. The price of dogs had dropped $5. He handed me a $10 bill. "No, there's still one stump in the way," he said. "The mail buggy can't carry things like dogs, so they'll come as far as the depot at Tahlequah, and you'll get the notice here because I ordered them in your name." I thanked Grandfather with all my heart and asked him how long I'd have to wait for the notice. He said, "I don't know, but it shouldn't take more than a couple of weeks." I asked him how I was going to get my dogs out from Tahlequah. "Well, there's always something going in," he said, "and you can ride in them." That evening, the silence of our supper was interrupted when my father asked this question. I may as well have exploded a bomb. For the instant, there was a complete silence, and then my oldest sister giggled. The two little ones stared at me. With a half-hearted laugh, my father said, "Well, I don't know, but it's a pretty good ways to Kentucky." "What do you want to know for? You thinking about taking a trip to Kentucky?" "No," I said. "I just wondered." My youngest sister giggled, and I asked, "Can I go with you?" I glared at her. Mama broke into the conversation. "I declare, what kind of question is that? How far is it to Kentucky? I don't know what's gotten into that mind of yours. You go around like you were lost, and you're losing weight. You're as skinny as a rail, and you look at that hair. Just last Saturday, they had a haircutting over at Tom Holland's place, but you couldn't go. You had to go prowling around the river and the woods." I told Mama, please, that I would get a haircut next time they had a cutting. And I just heard some fellows talking about Kentucky at the store, and I wondered how far away it was. Much to my relief, the conversation was over. The days dragged by. A week passed, and still, no word about my dogs. Terrible thoughts ran through my mind. Maybe my dogs were lost. The train had a wreck. Someone stole my money, or maybe the mailman lost my order. Then, at the end of the second week, the notice came. I started for home, walking along in deep thought. I decided it was time to tell my father the whole story. I fully intended to tell him that evening. I tried several times, but somehow I couldn't. I wasn't scared of him, for he never whipped me. He always was kind and gentle, but for some reason, I just don't know why, I just couldn't tell him. That night, snuggled deep in the soft folds of a feather bed, I lay thinking. I'd waited for my dogs so long, and I so desperately wanted to see them and hold them. I didn't want to wait a whole week. In a flash, I made up my mind very quickly. I got up, put on my clothes, I sneaked into the kitchen and got one of Mama's precious flour sacks. In it, I put 6 eggs, some leftover cornbread, a little salt, and a few matches. Next, I went to the smokehouse and cut off a piece of salt pork. I stopped at the barn and picked up a gunny sack. I put the flour sack inside the gunny sack. This I rolled up and crammed lengthwise in the bib of my overalls. I then was on my way. I was going after my dogs. Tahlequah was a small country town with a population of about 800. It was about 32 miles away as the crow flies, but it was really only 20 miles straight through the hills. Although I had never been to town in my life, I knew what direction to take. Tahlequah and Dye Railroad lay on the other side of the river from our place. I had the Frisco Railroad in my sight and the Illinois River on my left. Not far from where the railroad crossed the river lay the town of Tahlequah. I knew if it bore to the right, I would find the railroad, and if I bore to the left, I had the river to guide me. Sometime that night, I crossed the river on the riffle somewhere in the Dripping Springs County. Coming out of the river bottoms, I scattered up a long hog ridge, and in the broke back out in the flats. In a mule-eaten trot, I moved along. I had the wind of a deer, the muscles of a country boy, a heart full of dog love, and strong determination. I wasn't scared of the darkness or the mountains, for I was raised in those mountains. On and on, mile after mile, I moved along. I saw faint gray streaks above the east. I knew daylight was close. My bare feet were getting sore from the flint rock and the saw briars. I stopped behind the mountain stream, soaked my feet in the cool water, rested for a spell, and then started on. After leaving the mountain stream, my pace was much slower. The muscles of my legs were getting stiff. Feeling the pangs of hunger gnawing at my stomach, I decided I would stop and eat at the next stream I found. Then I remembered I had forgotten to include a can in which to boil my eggs. I stopped and built a small fire, cut off a nice thick slab of salt pork. I roasted it, and with a cold piece of corn pone bread made a sandwich. Putting out my fire, I was on my way again. I ate as I trotted along, and I felt much better. I came into the Tahlequah Bridge from the northeast. At the outskirts of the town, I hid my flour sack and provisions, kept my gunny sack, and I walked into town. I was scared of Tahlequah and the people. I had never seen such a big town and so many people. There was store after store, and some of them 2 stories high. The wagon yard had wagons on top of wagons, teams, buggies, and horses. 2 young ladies stopped me, asked me about my age, stared at me, and giggled. My blood boils, but I could understand. After all, I had 3 sisters. They couldn't help it because they were all women folk. I just went on. I saw a big man coming up the street. The bright, shiny star on his vest looked as big as a bucket. I saw the long black gun at his side and froze in my tracks. I heard of sheriffs and marshals, but I had never seen one. Stories repeated about them in the mountains told me how fast they were with a gun, how many men they had killed. The closer he came, the more frightened I got. I knew it was the end for me. I could just see him aiming his big black gun and shooting me between the eyes. It seemed like a miracle that he passed by, hardly glancing at me. Breathing a sigh, I walked on, seeing the wonders of the world. Passing a large store window, I stopped and stared. There in the window was the most wonderful sight I had ever seen. Everything under the sun, overalls, jackets, boats, beautiful cloth, new harnesses, collars, bridles, and then my eyes did pop open. There were several guns, and one of them had 2 barrels. I couldn't believe it. 2 barrels. I'd seen several guns, but never one with 2 barrels. Then I saw something else. The sun was just right, and the plate grass was a perfect mirror. I saw the full reflection of myself for the first time in my life. I could see that I did look a little odd. My straw-colored hair was long and shaggy and bushed out like a corn tassel. Looked like it had been hit by a wind. I tried to smooth it down with my hands. This helped some, but not much. What it needed was a good combing, and I had no comb. My overalls were patched, faded, but they were clean. My father had pulled out, and I just tucked back in my shirt. I took one look at my bare feet and winced. They were as brown as dead sycamore leaves. The spiderweb pattern of raw red scratches looked really odd in the saddle brown skin, and I thought, well, I won't have to pick up any more blackberries, and the scratches will soon go away. Pumped them under my arms, and surely the muscle was going to pop right through my thin blue shirt. I stuck out my tongue. It was as red as a pokeberry juice. Anything that was supposedly like that was supposed to be healthy. After making a few faces, I put my thumb in my ears and was making mule ears when two old women came by. They stopped and stared at me. I stared back, and as they turned to go on their way, I heard one of them say to the other, the words were hard to catch, but I did hear one word, wild. As I said before, they couldn't help it. They were women folk. As I turned to leave, my eyes again fell on the overalls and the bolts of cloth. I thought of my mother, my father, and my sisters. Here was an opportunity to make amends for leaving home without telling anyone. I entered the store. I bought a pair of overalls for Papa. And telling the storekeeper how big my mother and sisters were, I bought several yards of cloth. I also bought a large sack of candy. Glancing down at my bare feet, the storekeeper said, I have some good shoes. I told him I didn't need any shoes. He asked, would that be all? I nodded. He added up the bill. I handed him my $10. He gave me my change. After wrapping up the bundles, he helped me put them in my sack. Lifting it to my shoulder, I turned and I left the store. Out of the store, I picked out a friendly-looking old man and asked him where the depot was. He told me to go down to the last street and turn right. As far as I could go, and I couldn't miss it. I thanked him, and I started on my way. Leaving the main part of town, I started up the long street toward the residential section. I had never seen so many beautiful houses, and they were all different colors. The lawns were neat and clean and looked just like green carpets. I saw a man pushing some kind of mowing machine. I stopped to watch the whirling blades. He gawked at me. I hurried on. I heard a loud shouting and laughing ahead of me. Not wanting to miss anything, I walked a little bit faster, and I saw what was making the noise. More kids than I had ever seen, and they were playing around a big red brick building. I thought some rich man lived there and was giving a party for his children. Walking up to the edge of the playground, I stopped to watch. The boy and the girl were about my age. They were as thick as flies around the sour gun mill. They were milling, running, and jumping. Teeter-totters and swings were loaded up and down with them. Everyone was laughing and having a good time. Over against the building, a large blue pipe ran on an angle from the ground. A few feet from the top, there was a bend in it. The pipe seemed to go into the building. Boys were crawling into its big mouth. I counted 9 of them. One boy stood about 6 feet from the opening with his hand stuck in his mouth. Staring Google-eyed, I tried to figure out what were they doing. I got a surprise. Out of the hollow pipe spurted a boy. He sailed through the air and lit on his feet. The other one with a stick marked the ground where he landed. All 9 came shooting out, one behind the other, and each boy laughed. Every time a new mark was scratched. They ganged around, looking at the lines. There was a lot of laughing and loud talking, pointing, and arguing. Then all the lines were erased and a new scorekeeper was picked out. The others crawled back into the pipe. I figured out how the game was played. After climbing to the top of the slide, the boys turned and sat down, and one at a time they came flying out, feet first. That one shot out the furthest was the winner. I thought how wonderful it would be if I could slide down just one time. One boy spying at me from the corner came over, looking me up and down, and said, "Do you go to school here?" I said, "School?" He said, "Sure, school. What did you think this was?" No, I don't go to school here. Do you go to Jefferson? No, I don't go there neither. Don't you go to school at all? Sure, I go to school. Where? At home? You go to school at home? I nodded. What grade are you in? I said I wasn't in any grade. Puzzled, he said, You go to school at home and you don't know what grade you're in? Who teaches you? My mother. What does she teach you? I said, Reading, writing, and arithmetic. And I'll bet I'm as good as you are. He asked, Don't you have any shoes? I said, Sure, I have shoes. Why aren't you wearing them? I don't wear shoes until it gets cold. He laughed and asked, Where did I live? I said, Back in the hills. He said, Oh, you're a hillbilly. He ran back to the mob. I saw him pointing to me and talking to several boys. They stared my way and started yelling, Hillbilly! Hillbilly! Just before they reached me, a bell started ringing. Turning, they ran to the front of the building, lined up in two lines, marched like little tin soldiers, and disappeared inside the school. The playground was silent. I was all alone. I felt sad and lonely. I heard a noise on my right. I didn't have to turn around to recognize what it was. Someone was using a hoe. I'd know that sound if I heard it on a dark night. It was a little white-haired old lady working in a flower bed. Looking at the long blue pipe, I thought, there's no one around. Maybe I could have one slide anyway. I eased over, looked up the dark hollow. It looked scary, but I thought all the other boys had crawled into it, and I could see the last mark in the ground, and I thought, I bet I can beat that mark. Laying my sack down, I started climbing up. The further I went, the darker and more scary it got. Just as I reached the top, my feet slipped. Down I sailed, all the way down. I tried to grab onto something, but there was nothing to grab. I'm sure some great champion had slid out of that pipe and no more doubted the world record that had been broken. But if someone had been there when I came out, I don't know if I would set a record. I wish I could set a record that could stand today in all its glory. But I came out just like that. I went in, feet first, belly down. My feet were spread out like a bean shooter stalk. Arms flailing in the air. I zoomed up and down. I seemed to hang suspended in the air at the peak of my climb. I could see the hard-packed ground far below. And as I stared down, I shut my eyes and gritted my teeth. This didn't seem to help. With a splattering sound, I landed. I felt the air whoosh between my teeth. I tried to scream, but I had no wind left to make a sound. After bouncing a couple of times, I finally settled down to earth. I lay spread eagle for a few seconds, and then, slowly, got to my knees. Hearing loud laughter, I looked around. It was the little old lady with the hoe in her hand. She hollered, and I asked, well, how'd you like it? I didn't answer. I grabbed up my gunny sack and left. Far up the street, I looked back. The little old lady was sitting down, rocking with laughter. I couldn't understand these town people. If they weren't staring at a fella, they were laughing at him. The end of chapter 4.